You're watching RT live from Moscow. It's 8 o'clock here, and you're here with me, Tabang Mutse. Good to have you with us this morning. The chasm between Russia and the U.S. over how to achieve peace in Syria seems to be narrowing, with both sides saying they'll try to bring all warring factions to the table. The unusual show of solidarity came despite the U.S. not giving up its plans to arm the Syria rebels at some point in the future. Alexei Yaroshevsky has been following the first visit of Secretary of State John Kerry to Moscow.
After a very lengthy meeting between the Russian president, the Russian foreign minister and the U.S. state secretary, hardly anybody in the press room expected that there would be somewhat of a backing down from a very harsh rhetoric which we heard from Washington and Moscow on the Syrian conflict lately. In fact, at one point of the press conference, John Kerry even said that there is a common perception that Russia and the United States have been on a different page about Syria when they were here to show to everyone that they were on the same page. In fact, the main bottom line of the meeting, and that was voiced at the press conference, was that the US and Russia have decided to call an international conference probably by the end of this month to have both the members of the Syrian government and the Syrian opposition at the same negotiation table to find something of a peaceful solution to the ongoing conflict in the country. Now, an interesting twist to the press conference happened when, after the initiative was voiced, one of the reporters said, why should the Syrian people believe that this is the time this conference would actually change things? And Russian foreign minister came up with a very interesting answer to that.
At this stage, we have a task to convince all sides of the Syrian conflict to sit down at the negotiation table. After the Geneva Communiqué was adopted last June, Damascus expressed their willingness to work according to this plan. Afterwards, the government established a committee which is responsible for dialogue with all Syrians. Yesterday, the foreign minister of Syria confirmed that they are committed to dialogue on the basis of the communiqué. But these are just words. In order for the words to become actions, we need to hear from the opposition as well. So far, we haven't heard a word from the opposition, which would confirm its commitment to the Geneva Communiqué.
But the press conference took an even more interesting twist when John Kerry was asked a question by a journalist about the proposed legislation in the U.S. Congress to support the Syrian rebels with weapons and even military training. John Kerry's answer suggested that despite obvious closing in on positions on Syria between Russia and the United States, there's still a loophole remaining in the U.S. stance.
There is some sentiment, both in the House and Senate, to provide arms to the opposition. I think that ultimately that will be determined to some degree by the state of the evidence with respect to chemical weapons and what steps have been taken.
So despite the positions of Russia and the United States closing in on Syria, as it was repeatedly said at the press conference, still there is a feeling that they may be going in circles somewhat, particularly because of the statements by John Kerry about the chemical weapons and about the possible supply of weapons to the Syrian troops. If we remember last year when the Geneva Communiqué was signed, everyone was hopeful back then that this would bring the opposition and the Syrian government to the same negotiation table and that a peaceful solution will be found. This did not happen. Of course, we'll have to wait and see whether this will be the case this time, but definitely the initiative to call an international conference at the end of this month was voiced by the sides. The question is whether this initiative will, of course, become a reality.
US-based journalist Gilbert Mercier has been writing on the Syrian conflict. He told us that America's obsession with the issue of unproven use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime suggests that Washington's ready to take action in Syria.
It's a déjà vu situation. It's the déjà vu of Iraq, of the weapon of mass destruction, and that doesn't fly too well with the international community. Obama told at a press conference that, well, he was going to act on the situation in Syria, and he made an analogy between his action against Osama bin Laden and Gaddafi. So that is some kind of vague threat to Assad. You know, he basically said, okay, we will act on the chemical weapon issue. We're just taking our time, and we want to be sure that we are right.
4 UN peacekeepers have been abducted by rebel fighters in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. RT contributor Afshin Rattansi believes the incident is the latest among many, which make it harder for the U.S. to justify the favoritism towards the rebels.
If only the United States people realize that presumably John Kerry will have to be telling Mr. Putin, you see, the martyrs of Yarmouk, or whatever they call themselves, even as they kidnapped 21 UN observers in March and as they've kidnapped 4 more Filipinos. I've been to the Golan Heights, and the broken churches that I saw still today in the Golan Heights on the Syrian side and the green fields on the other side. But I think the key here is the American public needs to know that their government is supporting the de facto supporters, or at least those very close to those who would have supported the 9/11 attacks. And what we want now really is the American people to start writing to their congressmen and say the United States must stop supporting these rebels, because this is not going to benefit anyone in the Middle East or the United States.